Good afternoon, class. Welcome to this session of International Business Environment. In our last session, we were discussing some of the aspects of globalization. Now, to speak about globalization in simple words, it is nothing but the linking of the economy of a country with the economies of other countries. And this linkage between the economies would be done by means of free trade, free mobility of capital and labor, and other factors of production. Now, globalization also means inviting multinational corporations to invest in domestic economy. And that's when we can define globalization as a process associated with increasing openings, growing economic independence, and deepening economic integration in the world economy. Now, this globalization implies opening of economy to foreign investment, a removing of any kinds of obstacles that are present to the entry of multinational corporations, and also carrying out massive import liberalization by the way of bringing down import duties to a considerable level and by means of promoting international trade. Now, speaking about Indian scenario, with the globalization in India, these multinational corporations are allowed to enter in number of crucial sectors to which their entry was previously, that is to tell before economic reforms were restricted, or there are few sectors where their entry was totally banned. Now, this globalization assumes that all the domestic economy should have a close link with the economy of the world. Now, as a result of this linkage, there will be unrestricted flow of goods and also services. Along with this, the technology and expertise among different countries of the world will also flow from one economy to another economy. Now, there will be increased cooperation of domestic economy with different economies across the world. The capital and technology will flow from the developed countries of the world towards the developing nations, maybe like India, China, and other developing countries. Now, these multinational corporations will play and are also playing a very important role in the process of globalization. Now, because of this multinational corporation, there is increased movement of investment, technology, goods, and services among different nations. Now, different countries of world have come in close contact with one another. And also we can observe that now movement of people among different nations have also increased. Now with the improvement in transportation and communication, more people move from one nation to another in search of better jobs, better education, tourism, medical treatment, and also other opportunities that are available to increase their standard of living. Having said all this, the ultimate aim of globalization is to look the world in the form of what we call as global village. And the globalization is the process of integrating the domestic economy with the world economy. Now, this globalization includes some of the factors. To name some, because of globalization, there has been reduction in the rate of tariff and non-tariff barriers across different nations. And it is also allowing free flow of capital among different nations. And along with capital, it is also allowing flow of technology across different nations, and there is also free movement of labor among different nations. Now, coming to definition of globalization, there are huge number of definitions which are given by the economists, the theorists, and the practitioners. Now, every definition is true towards its finding. Here I have taken some of the definitions which I suppose may be useful for your better understanding of globalization. Now, Rubens Ricuper, he had the position of Secretary General of UNCTAD, or United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. According to him, globalization, I quote, is the integration of the world economy as a result of three main forces. First one being increase in trade in goods and service. Second one, increase in the investment of transnational companies and the consequent change in the nature of production. Production is becoming no longer national but as a process that takes place in different countries. And third one, international monetary transaction. Unquote. And there is one more economist named Deepak Nair. According to him, globalization, I quote, may be defined as a process associated with increasing openness, growing economic interdependencies, and deepening economic integration in the world economy. Unquote. Now, according to International Monetary Fund, I quote, globalization means growing economic interdependence of different countries through increasing cross-border transactions in goods and services and of international capital flows, and also through widespread diffusion of technology. Now, having said these definitions, in short, we can notice that there are some of the things that the definition highlights. Speaking of which, it mainly speaks about integration of the domestic economy with the global economy. That is to tell, the domestic economy is no more a closed economy or a isolated one which has no contact with the outside world at all, but it has opened up itself and the factors and the activities are being changed in a way in which the entire world is working, and every economy that is into activities would be benefited. The second factor that could be noted is now every economy is opening up to foreign capital, foreign technology, and thereby it is opening itself towards foreign competition also. And we can also see that free world trade with liberalized approach towards exports and imports is being done, and also elimination of tariffs and quotas is going on continuously so that there is free trade. Now, expansion of multinational corporations can also be observed, and there is also free flow of international capital. Now, because of the reforms, that is, especially this globalization policy undertaken by most of the economies, it has its own effects. Now, the effects, to speak, it varies from one part of the world to another, and from one area of business to another. Now, communications and infrastructure is most important in digital world, and in today's world it is also equally important to business. But not every country has got this, and there is also the non-traded sector, that is to tell goods and services which are not traded international. Now, there are some of the points. The list is not exhaustive, and the list is also not compulsory, but the following points can be assessed as key factors which has affected by globalization. The first one among that is competition. Now, undoubtedly, this globalization leads to increased competition. Now, this competition can be related to product and service cost, the product and service price, can relate to target market, it relates to technological adoption, it relates to quick response, quick production by companies also. Now, when a company produces with less cost and sells cheaper, it is able to increase its market share. Now, undoubtedly, customers have a large multitude of choice in the market, and this directly affects their behavior. Now, as a customer, even we want to acquire goods and services quickly and in a more efficient way than before. Now, the customer also expect high quality of goods at affordable or low prices. Now, all these expectations will definitely need a response from the company. Otherwise, the sales of companies will definitely decrease, and they would lose profit and market share. Now, a company must always be ready for price, product, and service, and also customer preference, because all of these are global market requirements. Now, the next effect can be discussed as meeting consumer expectations and taste. Now, consumers all over the world are better informed, have higher incomes, and therefore higher and more challenging expectations. Now, these force marketers to meet higher standards. Marketers have to research more extensively and also deeply and correctly to understand changing consumer behavior. The next one is economies of scale. Now, selling into a global market will always allow for enormous economies of scale, although it might not be all into all industries, but definitely some of the industries can benefit because of economy in scale of production. The next one is choice of location. Now business are now much free to choose where they operate from, and they can move to a cheaper and more efficient location. Now, this increased movement of business and jobs has to some level of extent. Now, and also this forced governments to compete with each other in providing an attractive and also low cost location. Now, the inputs that are being used vary in price across the world, and the business now also, on the other hand, have more freedom of movement in moving to get hold of those cheaper inputs. But one limitation on this is that the managers won't always move to some countries if living conditions are unpleasant or even dangerous. Now, the next one is multinational and multicultural management. Now, this is a major change to business and their managers. A multinational business environment is more complex with more variables, and so is definitely more difficult to manage. A multicultural employment policy leads to employees of many different nations, languages, religions, and culture in different offices across the globe. Now, these employees react in quite different ways to any incentives, and their reaction to motivation is also different. And these are the reasons which makes the managers to find it very difficult to manage those who are sensitive to all these different factors. Now it is very easy to inadvertently give offense and demotive the workers. Now the next one is globalization of market. Now national borders are becoming less important. Now marketers stretch across borders, and MNCs have taken advantage of this. Now there are issues of language and culture issues still present. But consumers are more alike, but by no means they are never same. Now, many businesses have made expensive mistake by not taking local variation sufficiently into account. Now, marketing in particular is manifold because of its dependence on language. The marketing books, if we observe, are full of story, often very amusing, of how business got wrong. The last effect can be seen as knowledge or information transfer. Now, information is most expensive and a valuable production factor in the current environment. Information can be easily transferred and exchanged from one country to another. If a company has a chance to use knowledge and information, then it means that it can adapt to this global changing. Now, this issue is similar with the technology transfer issue in global markets. The rapid changing of the market requires quick transfer of knowledge and efficient using of that knowledge and information. Having discussed all this, we shall now try to discuss some of the factors which influence globalization. Now, there exists, without any doubt, numerous factors that has affected the spread of globalization. And as we always say, it is the list is not exhaustive, and the list that has been given is not also compulsory. Now, it is just for your understanding, and by the way you perceive globalization, you can have your own list of factors which you think has influenced globalization. Now, first one is technological enhancement. Now, globalization has resulted in advancement of technology. Now, today's modern communication technology and mass media like radio, TV, phones, or internet are global standard. Not only this, but the way in which the technology has rapidly grown in past 1 decade, now the work of every activities that is being conducted has been made easy because of the internet, because of the technological devices that are being used, and also the information spread is very fast. Now, with these positive changes in technology, the data can be transferred easily from one place to another. The next one is cheaper and faster transportation. Now, due to continuous improvement in transportation, goods can be transferred from one place to another in minimum period of time, which has improved the developing environment of globalization. Now, control the next point is control on capital exchange. Now, the movement of capital from one country to another was also controlled, and these controls were abolished over the same period. And this allowed business to move money from one country to another in search of better business return. Next one is expansion of trade. Now, due to abolition of barriers to trade, trade becomes cheaper and therefore more appealing to business. The international institutions like World Bank and even in International Monetary Fund have contributed in the expansion of trade. And also, these institutions are major factors in the promotion of globalization. The next factor that has influenced globalization is expansion of competitions and thereby expansion in markets. Now, competition without doubt plays an important role in the economy. Now, due to favorable business atmosphere, new markets have opened up in various countries. Now, thereby giving more and bigger market to companies. Now, they have also gained due to higher growth rates and the emergence of large number of middle class population who has money to spend in the market in most of the developing countries. Now, these are some of the factors which influence globalization. The next one is the arguments which are in support of globalization. Now, before having said this, there are people who support globalization, there are people who oppose globalization. Now, people have their own perception and have varieties of opinion about the process of globalization. Some find it beneficial for the development of particular country, whereas there also exist many people who completely oppose it. Now, some of the arguments in support of globalization is now, in general, globalization is considered as positive force, especially when it comes to the field of corporate business. That too, particularly in the area of finance. Now, that is to tell, the per capita gross domestic product has shown growth of an upward movement from 1.4% in 1960 and 2.9% a year in the 1970s to 3.5% in 1980s and 5% in 1990s. Now, some of the arguments which are in favor of globalization is import and export. Now, after liberalization, import or export becomes more convenient and hence it affects every economy in favorable terms provided they are doing a very good strategic business. Next one is industrialization. The number of industry has also increased after the reform of liberalization. Now, the impact of this increasing industry can be observed in rapidly increasing growth rate. And this increase in the growth rate is right from the beginning of 1991. Now, the next one is increase in foreign investment. Now, after liberalization, the multinational companies have expanded their investment in India. The companies have shown their interest in different sectors of the economy also. Now, globalization has also increased the share of service sector in the GDP. And likewise, many Indian companies also have become multinational companies. Next one is expansion of service sector. Now, the most important effect of globalization, especially in Indian economy, is the expansion of service sector, and it has undoubtedly increased in a tremendous, might be in terms of education sector, might be in terms of medical sector, and all other kinds of service, especially the IT service. Next one is multinational companies. Now, multinational companies play a vital role in bringing different countries closer. Now, factories for production in different countries are set up by these companies. Now, goods of international level are produced by each country. Next one is economic liberalism and free trade. Now, globalization is always viewed as the beneficial spread of capitalism and liberty. Now, higher degree of political and economic freedom in the form of free trade in the developed world is an end in itself, which has produced higher level of overall material wealth. Now, demographic changes in the developing world after international integration and active economic liberalization resulted in rising general welfare and also reduced the level of liquidity. Now, having said this, it is also important to know some of the proponents of globalization or the people who have been leading personalities in telling why it is important for the countries to have this reform of globalization, or why is it important to open a country's economy. Now, the first person is Paul Krugman. Now, he is a firm and a very active supporter of free trade and globalization, and who disagrees with many opponents of globalization. He argues that many of them lack a basic understanding of cooperative advantage and its importance in the current scenario or today's fast developing world. The next person is Martin Wolf. Now, Martin Wolf is a British economic journalist, and he is of the opinion that income of poor developing countries with more than half the world's population grew significantly faster than those of world's richest countries that remained relatively stable in their growth, leading to incidence of poverty on one hand and reduction of international equity inequality on the other. Now, even though when on one side there are arguments which supports globalization, there are also criticisms of globalization or arguments against globalization. Now, there is no true that India has only benefited by globalization. The reality, without any doubt, is that globalization has created several problems as well. Now, some of the problems of globalization can be impact on small producers. Now, globalization adversely affect the small scale industries in India. Now, the small industries find it difficult to compete with the multinational companies. The condition of these industries is very poor because of globalization. And this is notable that after agriculture, most of the people are engaged in small scale industry, especially when it comes to Indian economy. The next one is effect on employment level. Now, the jobs of labor are not secure due to globalization. Now, the factory owners provide temporary employment in order to minimize cost. Now, the labor has to work for long hours in the factories. Now, globalization also permitted corporations to shift manufacturing and service jobs from high cost locations and thereby creating economic opportunities with the most competitive wage and worker benefits. That is to tell there is a shift towards outsourcing. The next one is uneven distribution of benefits. Now, the globalization has not been beneficial to all. The poor and weaker section of the society are far away from the benefits of globalization, while it is universally accepted that free trade encourages globalization among many countries. Now, some countries tend to protect their domestic producers. The primary exports of poor countries are usually agriculture production. Now, large countries subsidize their farmers. For example, the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy is one such policy for foreign crops. The next one is influence of developed countries. Now, the globalization is implemented by the directives of World Trade Organization. The developed countries affect such types of organization more than developing countries and got benefited also more than developing countries. Next one is regional disparities. Now, globalization causes increase in regional disparities. Now, developing countries have not received benefits as much as developed countries have. Similarly, within the country, the developed regions are benefited more than backward regions. Next one is impact on diversity of culture. Now, few critics of globalization argue that it affects the cultural diversity adversely. Introduction of a culture by a dominating country through globalization can become a threat to the local culture diversity. Some also claim that globalization might actually lead to Americanization or westernization of culture, wherein the overpowering culture concept of politically and economically powerful Western countries spread and cause harm to local cultures. The next one is gender equality or gender inequality in labor force. Now, though globalization has increased what we can call as women's race to employment, but the goal of lowering gender inequalities remain distant and hard to attain without capital regulations and a reorientation and expansion of the state's role to fund public goals and to provide a social safety net. Now, uh, there are some of the opponents of globalization also. One such person is Joseph Stiglitz. Now, he says that countries that have pioneered globalization with their own efforts have definitely succeeded in benefiting from globalization, while countries which were economically backed by international institutions like International Monetary Fund or IMF have gained very little from this concept of globalization. Now, having said so many things, we can continue with the further topics in our next session. But we can also discuss what we had discussed in our today's two sessions. We started with the meaning of liberalization, sorry, we started with privatization and we also discussed globalization. And when we speak of globalization, it refers to the process which integrates different countries economically through education, society, and policies. It enables always them to view themselves not only through their national identity but also as a part of world as a whole. Now, globalization has promoted import export activities, increased the liquidity of capital, allowing investors in developed nations to invest in developing nations, and the corporations have greater flexibility to operate across borders. There is integration of global mass media, and it is more possible than ever before. And with globalization, there is a global market for companies to trade their products and a wider range of options for people to choose from among the products of different nations. There is a sound flow of money, and thus it has resulted in decrease in the currency difference between developing and developed countries. Competitive market does not allow to charge higher prices, and as a result inflation is less likely to occur. And also globalization leads to outsourcing, and poor countries are being exploited by the rich countries where the workforce is taken advantage of and low wages are implemented. And we can also see that economic depression in one country can trigger adverse reaction across globe. of globalization may increase regional disparities and gender inequality. Now, yes, some of the topics that we have discussed has given you uh, ideas regarding what globalization is and how globalization has affected the trade, especially in the past 5 to 6 decades. So, one thing we can understand from this is in the beginning, the trade was heavily impacted by industrialization, and the second biggest thing that has impacted the trade is undoubtedly globalization. Now, in our next session, we shall discuss regarding some few other topics of globalization and also the recent trends in global trade. Now, speaking about global trade and the recent developments, the thing